What's up everyone? In this video I'm going to talk about the Nikon D60 and see if it's still good in 2025 and so on. So the Nikon D60 was released back in January of 2008. This makes the Nikon D60 a 17-year-old camera. Brand new in 2008, it was $630 just for the body alone. And with the lens, it was $750. In 2025 money, that's about $1,100 now. And now you can find one that's pretty well used for right under $100. I bought mine for $60 used. And if you're lucky, you can probably find some with extra lenses and extra accessories for a lot less, or just for about around that range. And now to the specs of the Nikon D60. It has a 10 megapixel CCD crop sensor. It has 3 autofocus points. The ISO ranges from 100 to 1600 with a boost up to 3200, and it says high 1. It shoots at 3 FPS max. It has 1 SD card slot, and it has a 2.5-inch LCD screen. One of the great things I do like about this camera is the image quality. I also really like that it's light and compact, and it also has pretty good autofocus speed too, especially for the age. And one of the things I do like about this camera is the menu system. It's pretty straightforward and it's really easy to navigate. Another great thing I like about this camera is also the super wide range of lenses you can use too. So as long as you have lenses that says it's a Nikon f-mount lens that's either from Sigma, Tokina, or Tamron, or another third-party brand manufacturer, just as long as it says Nikon f-mount, it will work on the Nikon D60. But just be wary that some of these lenses will not autofocus, but if you want to use manual focus, you can use it with the Nikon D60. Another great thing I like about the D60 is also the battery life. I mean, we're just gonna go to the cons about this camera. It's not really a con. I think it's just more of me just nitpicking. One of the things that isn't going to be popular with this camera is that it does not have video recording. The Nikon D60 does not do video recording. Another thing is that it's just a lack of professional camera settings or the layout, specifically talking about the button layout. I prefer to see my settings on top of the LCD screen, kind of like the Nikon D90 or the D700. And it also doesn't have a dedicated ISO button. You can switch one of the function buttons on the camera to be an ISO button or another function, which is nice. For that button, it's just my dedicated ISO button, which is nice. I like that Nikon did that. And another con is that this camera does not have Bluetooth or Wi-Fi built in. So you will not be able to connect to the Nikon D60 with your phone because it does not have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth built in this camera. So another con about this camera too is that it does not have a screw drive like the Nikon D700, D7000, or the D90. So you will not be able to utilize the older Nikon AFD lenses that have the screw type like this. So if you find a lens that has the screw type lens mount like this, it will not autofocus on the Nikon D60 unless it has a AFS motor. I know that Sigma and Tokina and Tamron and the other ones have lenses, but I don't have that complete list to see which lenses work on the D60. And if you do know which lenses work on the D60 from those other brand manufacturers, please let me know in the comments below, because that'll be really helpful for me and for others too. Another con is just the 1 memory card slot. I'm fine with just one. I know people would look for dual, but 1 memory card slot is more than enough, especially for this camera. And another con too, last but not least, is the 3 autofocus points. It can be really limiting. I think it's not super overwhelming too. I think 3 autofocus points really does help you compose your shots, but to a limit. So there's a lot of questions about this Nikon D60 being compared to the D40 or the D3000. Spec-wise, the D60 is a lot better than the D40, but if you're looking at the D40X, I mean, they're basically the same. The D40X and the D60 is basically the same, but the D60 does have more features compared to the D40X. And physically, they're both the same too. If you're comparing the D40 and the D60, as you can look at them here, side by side, front and back. So the D60 was also replaced by the D3000 too. And I think that D3000 was basically a D60, but with just some better features. And here I'll just show you how they compare. The D60 and the D3000 both have a 10 megapixel sensor. The D60 has 3 autofocus points, whereas the D3000 has 11 autofocus points. Both of them have no in-body image stabilization. That's more of a new modern technology anyways. These cameras are 10 plus years old. So the D60 and the D3000 will not have the built-in in-body image stabilization. Both the D60 and D3000 has an ISO range between 100 to 1600, and they both shoot at 3 FPS. And I think physically the only upgrade from the D60 to the D3000 is that the D3000 has a 3-inch LCD screen and the D60 has a 2.5-inch LCD screen. Other than that, I think tech spec wise, I think they're basically the same. If you're comparing images between the two, it's going to be really hard to tell. I know that a lot of people compare these two. If you do need the extra help, the D3000 has a guide mode that would be helpful. But if you're really on a budget, the D60 is an excellent start. The D3000 does have a guide mode, which is really helpful, but it is a lot more. I've seen them around the $300 price range in USD. No clue why they're still up that much, because it's just a D3000. They should really be much lower than $300, especially for the lens and body. But it also depends on the condition it's in too. It might be a pristine condition and someone's just looking to keep it. Personally, I would still use the D60. The D3000, it just feels like it's not there yet for an entry-level camera. And as much as I like the D3000, I just prefer the D60 just because it's simple and it's really intuitive. You know, you turn it on and boom, it's ready to go. Versus the D3000, I feel like it was just the beginning of Nikon creating the D3000 series, so they were trying to playing around with what features you can play with. So let's talk about the Nikon D60's image quality. I think this is where the Nikon D60 really shines. The D60 CCD sensor definitely gives the images a very natural look to the photos. That's one of the reasons why I think that D60 owners really like this camera. It can produce great colors, great image quality, and the higher ISO ranges gives you a unique look from this camera. But ISO above 800 is gonna give you some grain for sure. It goes from 800 to 1600 to high 1, and high 1 is ISO 3200. But I think depending on how much light you get to work with, you can get away with 1600, but it's still really grainy at ISO 1600, as you can see here. I think 800 is pretty safe just depending on how much light you're working with. As for sharpness, this really depends on what kind of lenses you're using. When I bought my Nikon D60, I had the 18 to 55 on it. I was basically sold on the image color and the quality of it. I didn't zoom in. I was just relying on the D60's LCD screen to kind of show me how the images looked. And I thought they looked perfectly fine. But if you have a nice portrait lens, like an f2.8 lens or the 51.8, you will see the image quality and sharpness increase too. So sharpness just really depends on what kind of lens you have and what your settings are. The D60 is really capable of getting sharp images though, for sure. And I also think it beats out any modern mirrorless camera image quality today. And again, the Nikon D60 does not have video recording, but it does have stop motion. In the D60, stop motion is different from videos because all the Nikon D60 does is stitch individual photos to become a short clip. It does not do video recording. So if you're familiar with stop motion, you probably have an idea of where this is going. But how the Nikon D60 does stop motion is a little confusing at first. But if you're not familiar with stop motion, it's basically animating your subject frame by frame to create motion. And here's how you create a stop motion in the Nikon D60. So first, you do have to take a picture of your subject. Second, take multiple images. So you're doing it frame by frame. And then the next step, you go to menu, go to retouch menu, then select your frame size. You're really limited in the video quality, so just make sure you choose the highest one and it's gonna look decent, and we'll get back to that pretty soon here. After that, go to create movie, then select your first image and then your last image. Then go to save and it'll pop up again to say save and select save again. After this, it will create the video and you can play to see how it works. Again, it does not record videos. The D60 is not capable of a video recording, so don't use this as a video camera because it doesn't have any video recording capabilities at all. All it can do is create a stop motion videos from the pictures you took. So if you love doing stop motion and you're on a budget, the D60 isn't too bad. And here is an example of a stop motion film or short that I just did really quickly. So how good is the Nikon D60? I would say if you're on a budget, it's an amazing camera to have, especially if you're on a tight budget. As I said earlier, if you're looking between the D3000 and D60, and the D3000 is out of your budget, the D60 is perfectly fine. I bought mine for about 60 bucks. You can find the body for well under $100. And then if you can find the lens and camera body together for under 100, I would say it's a pretty good deal depending on the condition it's in. And the D60 is a simple and really easy camera to use too. It was designed for new photographers. The menus and the buttons are really easy to navigate, so you won't be overwhelmed by a bunch of buttons and acronyms you're not familiar with. For example, if you look at this camera here, my Nikon D3, you can just look at all these buttons that are, you know, if you're a professional, you'll understand it. But if you're a brand new photographer, this is gonna be looking into like underneath a car, and you won't know what parts are what and what's going and what's happening. So the Nikon D60 is a very easy camera to learn with. And I think this camera definitely still rivals today's mirrorless cameras too. And it definitely beats the latest iPhone and cell phone image quality too. So attach a decent lens on it and you will see image quality improve along with sharpness, just depending on what settings you're using. And again, as I've said in my previous videos, there are no best settings for this camera because it just really depends on, you know, what lens you're using, what your settings are, lighting, and a few more other factors, because there's just so many factors. There is no one best setting for this camera. But one lens I do love using with this camera is the 35 1.8G DX lens. Personally, I just love the focal length. It's great for portraits. Love using it for walking around town or just on a weekend outing. It's one lens I would recommend to brand new portrait photographers. So if you're looking to get in portraits, you can find this 35 1.8G DX used for well under $100. Well, I think I bought mine for about $80. So if you're patient enough, you can find one that's used. Definitely pick one up, and I think you'll really like it, especially if you understand how to use shutter speed, ISO, and aperture modes. I do have a portraits video on the Nikon D60 on my channel, so check that out too. Or you can click on the link below in the description. So this camera definitely still holds up, and if you know someone that's interested in photography and looking to get something more serious than a phone, I think this camera is an excellent stepping stone to really getting into photography, especially if you're on a budget. And also, don't let the age of this camera scare you. Yes, it is 17 years old, but the D60 is proof that creating great photography is not about having the latest gear. It's about knowing how to use what you have. Sure, it might not have the latest modern features, but this camera I'm gonna highly recommend because it's just, like I said earlier, an excellent camera to start out with in photography. And also available with this camera is a potential to get a super wide range of lenses. So if you have had this camera or you still have it, I'd love to read your comments and experiences with it. Was it your first camera? Did you buy it for a super good deal? Leave a comment below because I'd love to hear and read your stories. And if you have any questions about this camera, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll try my best to help and answer those questions too. And if you found this video helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button because that does help my channel grow. I really do appreciate you watching this video. And again, like I said, if you have a Nikon D60, you have any questions on it, please let me know. And yeah, thanks for watching everyone. See ya.